Hey everybody, welcome back to Munro Live. My name is Scott Hoffman, and today I'm excited to have a chance to talk about the all-new Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe. So this is, the Grand Cherokee is a vehicle that's been around for many generations at this point and originally came out in 1992. We are now on the 5th generation, and the Grand Cherokee is kind of near and dear to me because my grandpa, he had a first and a second gen one. My wife currently drives a 4th gen WK Grand Cherokee, so very familiar with the vehicle. It's been exciting to see it kind of come along through the various generations, and what's probably most interesting about this current iteration of the vehicle is that this is the first time that Jeep has introduced an electrified component to the powertrain of the vehicle. So what we have here, this is the 4xe variant, kind of the giveaway from the outside. You see there's some of these blue accents. So we've got the blue tow hook with the nice sort of rubberized accent on that. Up on the Jeep logo on the hood here, we have some of that same blue, and that carries throughout some of the rest of the vehicle on the side badging. Another dead giveaway, if we were to come around to the side here, you do have this E distinction, which matches a 4xe logo on the back of the vehicle. So this is your charge port for the PHEV, PHEV meaning plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. The plug-in aspect of the vehicle, this is where you plug it in, and you've still got a conventional fuel tank back there. So at a high level, as far as powertrain options for this vehicle, they've got 3 different options. So you have the good old trusty Pentastar 3.6 liter V6, which has been in a ton of Jeep vehicles over the year. It's what's in my wife's vehicle. Awesome engine, about 293 horsepower, I think. Then you have the legendary Hemi V8, right? 5.7 liter, used in a ton of different variants of their products, but available in this vehicle as well. And then you have the all-new 4xe powertrain, which consists of a 2-liter inline-4 turbocharged engine with an accompanying electrified powertrain. And that's what we're going to kind of spend time getting into today, that E aspect of the 4xe. Interestingly, I think some might be curious to know, okay, from a performance perspective, how does this new powertrain compare to some of those older legacy ones? Believe it or not, the 2-liter with the electrified augmentation to it puts out 375 horsepower, and that's compared to the 293 from the Pentastar V6 and 357 from the Hemi 5.7 liter V8. So it's actually the most powerful of the 3 available powertrain options, and we're excited that the one that we have to look at today has it, and it's what we get to review. So beyond the powertrain, the rest of this vehicle, so this is an overland edition of the trim package, so that on the spectrum of sort of base to premium is definitely on the medium to higher side of the offerings. So throughout the vehicle, if we were to walk around, and we'll just kind of glance in the windows. I know Carl's going to do an interior review, so he'll probably be much more detailed than I, but I'll say just at a high level, interior extremely well appointed. Leather, soft touch materials throughout, a lot of neat infotainment features. Just at a glance, one of the coolest things that we can see, and we'll hop in a minute and get it powered up and everything, but that passenger IP screen, love that for the navigation from the passenger seat. We'll get into that, and it makes more sense when it's powered up. But if we just do a quick walk around on the vehicle before we get into the powertrain, another couple things that I would just point out, changes for this variant of the vehicle. So right now you can see the gap between the tire and the top of the wheel well is pretty substantial here, and this is because it is currently in its highest state of its dynamic air suspension right now. So this is what they call the off-road 2 portion. It's got air suspension that's dynamically configurable, so in the vehicle I can hit a button and it'll raise or lower. At its max, which is what it's currently at, it has about 11.3 inches of ground clearance, which is actually quite a bit, and so this thing is no slouch when it comes to off-road performance. But that also can be lowered down quite a bit, actually through 5 levels, to the point where it's a little bit easier to ingress and egress. Definitely a cool feature on this vehicle, and something that, you know, we saw the adjustable air suspension on the Rivian R1T and R1S recently. So neat that that feature has made its way onto this vehicle. Working our way kind of around the outside, some styling changes certainly from the last generation of the vehicle, which is the one that my wife currently drives. Kind of another giveaway. The lighting scheme for the rear changed. These got a little bit more compact. The light bar extends across. Again, we see we've got some of that 4xe badging, but definitely a pretty handsome vehicle overall. This variant has the so-called floating roof option, where the whole top hat of the vehicle, or top side of the top hat above the belt line, is this nice shiny piano black color. So they did that with a combination of painted black trim, and then they did a masking operation to actually paint the body in white separately from the top. to the bottom. So a little bit of extra cost and complexity there, but it sure does look cool with the floating roof concept. I know that's been a big thing lately. So we'll continue to work our way around here, and then ultimately I'm going to pop the hood and we'll kind of get into it. The last thing on the exterior walk around that I just wanted to point out, kind of a neat feature, and we'll power it up later and look, but in the grille right here, they have kind of a unique feature. At first glance, you might say, oh, just a camera, what's going on there? So that, hidden in one of the sort of legendary 7 slots of the Jeep grille, this is actually a lens that conceals an infrared camera that they use for animal and pedestrian protection. So in the vehicle, this camera, it's obviously projecting an IR beam. It's got a pretty long field of view. They claim that they can use essentially heat signatures at up to 219 yards to detect either animals or pedestrians. And the way they display it on the IP, it's on the cluster there, it's pretty neat. It actually, you know, if you're driving at night, you would see a projection right on the cluster of an animal or a person walking across, and it gives you like a little alert. One of the folks who brought this home tried it out with their dog at a low speed. Fortunately, no animals were harmed in the making of this review, but they said it worked great, right? Their dog ran across and they were able to boop, get a little alert. So kind of a cool feature. Curious to see if that's something we might see on more vehicles.
This video is sponsored by Anker and their Powerhouse 767 portable power station. With over 2,000 watt hours of battery capacity, up to 1,000 watts of solar input, and Anker's ultra-efficient GaN Prime technology, the Powerhouse 767 can keep you up and running longer, faster, and cleaner. This January, you can make the Powerhouse 767 your preferred device for home backup, outdoor recreation, and more, at a reduced price using the discount code Munro Live 767. Be ready for anything with Anker.
All right, and no vehicle review is complete without a popping of the hood and looking at some of the components there within. So I'm just going to pull the lever here. We'll pop the hood and point out some of the key components, some of the giveaways that would indicate what this vehicle is working with in terms of a powertrain and propulsion perspective. So as this comes up, we take a glance. The first thing we see, Jeep, little engine cover here, so, and then it's saying that it's a turbo. So the kind of giveaway of the 3 powertrain options available, only one of them is turbocharged. In this case, it is the 2-liter i4 that is paired with the electric powertrain. So it's tough to see too much in here, but just some of the things I would point out, giveaways to be aware of, that this has an electrified aspect and is the vehicle that we're talking about. If we look down in here, you can see there's one high voltage cable. It's got some shrouding and some foil on it, but you can see that orange cable down there is going to the high voltage electronic air compressor, which we'll speak more about in a moment. And then on the other side of the engine bay here, we've got another orange cable. This one's a bit fatter. It goes down right there. So that is what's connected to the belt starter generator in there. And that actually has a few different high voltage runs in it. So these are key high voltage components that, again, we're going to speak to in the architecture layout that we walk through. But just to be aware of where they're at, another kind of interesting giveaway, when you start talking about an electrified powertrain and the cooling of that, another kind of giveaway is you see there are multiple cooling reservoirs here. So normally a vehicle, if it just had an internal combustion powertrain, would just have one of these. As you start to get into power electronics and different things that need heated and cooled and might have different requirements, they have a couple of additional reservoirs that are added on here. So as with most engine bays these days, it's hard to see too much. I know we're going to get this up on the hoist later, but we'll speak to some of these components. But yep, under here we can basically see it's got the i4, we can see the BSG, we can see the high voltage EAC, and other than that, it's pretty well closed out and just pretty neatly packaged engine bay. Let's get into the meat of it, right? This whole PHEV, plug-in hybrid versus ICE vehicle. What is that? Is it good? Is it bad? How does it change the vehicle? So I figured maybe to jump into that, we could do a little flip chart session today. I know Mike Lane did one of those and people liked it, so we're going to take our own stab at that. And what I'd like to do is talk about essentially how a vehicle changes when you go from a conventional internal combustion engine powertrain and you add these electrified elements. What does that do and how does that impact the vehicle? So we're going to sketch those elements in a moment. I would just say initially though, fundamentally speaking, one of the challenges I have with PHEVs is that when you think about lean design and a reduced number of parts being better from a quality perspective and a reliability perspective, with a PHEV, You still have an internal combustion engine and all of the goodies that go with that, but you're adding in an electrified powertrain. So you take a vehicle that was already full and capable without an electrified portion and you add all that in. And to say that is one thing, but to actually see that is another. So I want to kind of sketch that out so people get a feel for how much stuff you have to cram into that vehicle to make it work. So let's start with what exists in a typical internal combustion engine vehicle. So up front, and again, so this is a rough approximation of a vehicle. This is the front, so we'd say this is the hood. FOV means front of vehicle. This is going to be crude, but we'll work through it. Bear with me. So in the front, you're going to have your internal combustion engine, right? So this is ICE. In this case, it's the 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. Then you're going to have a transmission that goes to that. Trans back here. This is a longitudinally oriented powertrain, so that means it runs north-south. There are transverse applications where the motor and transmission would be flipped, but this one runs north-south. From there, you're going to have a transfer case. And then from that transfer case, it's going to basically have an option where you go back to a drive shaft and a rear diff that goes out to the wheels. And then you're going to have a front drive shaft that goes to a front diff that goes out to the front wheels. And that's how you get your 4-wheel drive in this. So these are kind of your engine, your transmission, your drive line, and then obviously you've got exhaust that's coming from the engine that routes through this tunnel and goes out, usually at the back of the vehicle. And then you've also got a fuel tank somewhere back here. And it's usually like in a saddle tank. It looks something kind of like this. So you can see this is kind of the guts of what's in here. Now let's start adding some of the electrified components that are going to make this a little bit unique. So in this vehicle, there are actually 2 electric motors that help augment the internal combustion powertrain. One is called a belt starter generator, and what that is essentially a fancy name for an alternator, a high voltage alternator that's going to live on the internal combustion engine and be connected to the crankshaft with a belt. It's going to take the place of the starter and the alternator, so it's going to start the vehicle for start-stop functions. It's also going to run power to the high voltage battery, which we'll sketch in here in a moment. But because it's connected to the crankshaft, it can also spin in concert with the internal combustion engine to provide some boost and some additional torque, right? So in the Ram 1500 vehicles that you've probably seen running down the road, that e-torque system that they describe comes via a belt starter generator, or BSG. Chrysler, Stellantis, Jeep, they're not the first folks to do a BSG. We've seen Volkswagen and Audi do it on some vehicles, but they are among the first, I'd say, to kind of propagate it onto multiple vehicles, and it's exciting to see that come in here. So this BSG is going to live up here on the internal combustion engine on the accessory drive. The second e-motor that they're going to have is in the transmission. So packaged within this 6-speed automatic transmission, in the place where a torque converter would normally be, you're going to have a secondary e-motor. Then to take DC power from the battery and convert it to AC for your electric motors, you're going to have something called a power inverter module that's going to take the DC signal coming from the battery and ultimately run power to the BSG and to this e-motor in here. Next, you're going to have a high voltage battery, which is going to be difficult to package, but much like the fuel tank, you're going to have what's called a saddle battery that's going to go in the back here. It has to have sort of an arc in it to clear the exhaust that runs to the rear and the drive shafts that run to the rear. So that's definitely a challenge. In this case, the vehicle has a 17 kilowatt hour lithium ion high voltage battery, 400 volts. So same voltage that would be in a traditional BEV, but just a smaller pack, as you can imagine. So you've got that. Then you need your charge port. So on this vehicle, that lives up on the front fender here. I know we were looking at that. This is going to be where you plug in the vehicle to an external source. Ultimately, that's going to be what puts power into your battery. The next thing that you need is an onboard charger and a DC-DC converter. Those can be 2 separate components, 1, 2, but they can also be combined into a single unit, often called an integrated dual charging module, which is what Stellantis chose to do here. So in this case, these 2 were combined into one. This became your IDCM. So your charge port, you're going to go into this. That's eventually going to go to the battery. From the battery, you're going to go to the inverter, and then that's going to go to the electric motors. And then you've got just a couple of other key monuments that you need to keep in mind. You've got a high voltage EAC, or electronic air compressor. So this is going to be what pushes refrigerant through the system to cool the vehicle and to cool the battery in concert with the ethylene glycol and the coolant system. So that's another high voltage monument. And somewhere in here, we have to get up this vehicle on a hoist. I don't know exactly where it's packaged, but I believe there's also a high voltage heater in there somewhere. So heater, EAC, this was BSG, this was inverter, this was e-motor. So essentially at the end of the day, and this was battery. And as you can imagine, so you've got high voltage cables that are connecting this circuit of things. So I don't want to, again, I don't want to say that PHEVs are not a great thing. I think they are an awesome transitional option, and they do open up a lot of flexibility for folks who might still have range anxiety or concerns about being able to function, over a certain amount of miles. But fundamentally speaking, one of the challenges I have is that you're just adding a lot more parts to the vehicle, a lot more cost to the vehicle, and things that, the vehicle could run completely without the electrified portion, or it could run only on that portion. In this case, they've got 25 miles of all-electric range, which is pretty good for a PHEV. Their combined MPGE is 57. Total range with both the electric and the ICE system is 440 miles. So very impressive for those who are interested in a PHEV. It just, fundamentally speaking, I struggle with all these parts being added and really trying to fit all of that in there. To me, it kind of says, man, that's a lot of things that can potentially go wrong, right? So I don't know. I don't know if PHEVs are for me, but that said, if I were to get a PHEV, I would strongly consider this one. I've had a Grand Cherokee. I've loved a Grand Cherokee. This vehicle is no slouch when it comes to on-road performance. The output is really impressive. The creature comforts are all there. And fundamentally speaking, right, if I were to use this to commute back and forth to work, I could run it on all electric range and use it as an EV because it'd be under that 25 miles and charge it at work. So I do love that. It's an impressive offering. I think it's a great step in the right direction for Jeep. I know they've cascaded this to the Wrangler, right? They have a 4xe version of that. Between those two vehicles, I'd definitely choose this one. Wranglers are cool for what they are. But interestingly, from a capability perspective, you're not going to make this a rock crawler, but this has won awards for, I think it was like the Mudfest or something it won. It's gotten some really impressive off-road accolades. It is trail rated, as the badge says. So certainly if you're looking for a balance of sort of comfort and capability, you can't go wrong with the Grand Cherokee. It is their flagship vehicle, and it's like that for a reason. They brought this out in '92. They had that sort of funny commercial where they smashed through the glass of Cobo Center saying it was going to be a paradigm-shifting vehicle for them. It's been a huge seller for the Jeep and Stellantis or FCA brand. And so really, kind of neat to see the latest iteration of this. I love that it's available in a 2 and a 3-row variant. One bummer though, if you're interested in the PHEV, you can only currently get it in the 2-row variant. So they've not yet made it available with the 3-row. Again, I can understand why, packaging all that stuff and fitting that in multiple wheelbases. When they go from the 2-row to the 3-row, it extends the wheelbase of this vehicle by 5 inches from 116.7 inches to 121.7. So again, having to fit all that in, I realize that makes it a little difficult. That might be another drawback for me if I wanted the PHEV. I think at this point I have one daughter and another daughter on the way, so I would want that 3rd row, and it's a bummer that you can't get it with this. But perhaps that's something that they'll bring out in the future. But I guess probably kind of to wrap up, one last thing I would say is people often ask, oh, okay, a PHEV, where does that fall on the spectrum from internal combustion engine to BEV, right? Is this most of the way to a BEV? I would say that it is definitely a step in the right direction, but it is probably, I would say, more ICE than BEV at this point, because a lot of the legacy way that you would design a vehicle and package these things is still intended for ICE powertrains. So even the presence of a tunnel that routes exhaust and a transmission through it, you don't really need that in a BEV, right? So I would say if a 0 was an ICE and a 10 was a BEV, this is probably like a 3.5 or a 4. So definitely a step in the right direction. I know that the Stellantis brand will learn a lot having electrified these vehicles, and a lot of those same components will play, but ultimately their body structure will change to accommodate a larger battery, and obviously their motors will grow, their driveline will change, but definitely a step in the right direction, but definitely not quite yet a BEV. So for them to go to a BEV, it wouldn't be in this vehicle platform. It would definitely be a whole new body that would accommodate it. I think with a PHEV, they've squeezed just about everything they can onto one chassis. So excited to see what the future has to offer, but definitely pretty impressed with this so far. And yeah, looking forward to taking this one home and driving it around a bit. As always, thank you for joining Munro Live. Hopefully you found some of this insightful and interesting. And as always, please don't hesitate to ask us any questions, tune in, subscribe, whatever floats your boat. And we certainly appreciate the time. Have a great day. Bye.